we monitor human rights in China, and we have for 3 decades. In that time, we've seen hundreds of millions lifted out of poverty and the advent of a true domestic human rights movement, which has been led in part by courageous artists, writers, and advocates. To understand the human rights situation in China, it is useful to step back and review the country's recent history. The Chinese Communist Party took power in 1949, and the country has been marked by political upheavals ever since. The Great Leap Forward, the Cultural Revolution, targeted the arts and culture and led to at least 36 million deaths across the country. Today, the Chinese government continues to deny and restrict citizens' fundamental rights, including the freedom of expression, freedom of association, freedom of religion. Censorship, including especially artistic and internet censorship, is pervasive. A major problem in China today is also self-censorship, because the Chinese Communist Party has long seen art, movies, and entertainment as tools of political indoctrination. It refers to art as thought work. Artists and those on the front line of creativity are forced to tread carefully around any politically sensitive topics, including Tibet, Taiwan, or the suppression of the 1989 democracy movement. Because of the injustices that Ai WeiWei has seen in his life, he's used his art and his clout to tell stories the Chinese government does not want you to hear. And these stories are visible in the exhibit tonight. That schools, they are called tofu buildings in China, in the Sichuan province, collapsed and children were killed because corrupt officials took bribes to build with unreinforced concrete in quake zones. In some cases, the building on either side of the schools remained standing, while more than 5,000 children died in those collapsed schools. The government should have documented the name and age of each child who died in Chengdu. Instead, parents who ask why their only child, remember the one-child policy, why their only child died were persecuted. Ai WeiWei took up this terrible job of documenting the deaths of children, and it's work that I think will live forever, as unfortunately the children will not, in the art that you saw out front, the snake with the tiny backpacks. For this work, Ai WeiWei was beaten on the head severely enough that he had a brain hemorrhage and almost died. Ai WeiWei is not a lone figure. Human rights defenders, journalists, lawyers, and activists whose names you don't know risk harassment, unlawful detention, forced disappearances, and long prison sentences, often on bogus charges. Ai WeiWei himself was held for months on trumped-up tax evasion charges. These activists fight with all the tools at their disposal, including the internet and humor. The Chinese Communist Party does not like to be mocked. They believe that, as Ai WeiWei says, to live your life in fear is worse than losing your freedom. Those who wish to see China progress can take hope from Ai WeiWei's struggle and know that there are many courageous people inside China who are even now willing to stand up for human rights and to fight for what they believe in. Equally important is to remember that the Chinese government is not monolithic. External pressure from the Canadian and other governments to reform can only help China's courageous citizens who are fighting at considerable risk for the goal that could literally change the world, and that is a China that would be rights-respecting at home and abroad.